name is Rick. I am a doctor, but not the useful kind like Tim or Phoebe, Doctor of Moles. This is all quite new for me as well. But I'm from the charity Findacure, which works in rare diseases across the UK, and my title is a project we're working on to try and find new ways to fund clinical trials for rare diseases. And that's some work I'm really lucky to work on with Tim and with Syndrome UK, and actually some of the patients here as well. So I want to tell you a bit about it, and really as a thank you to those that helped. The first thing is to give a bit of background. I'm sure you're all aware that rare conditions are a huge issue. This is why. There are, well, probably over 7,000 rare conditions out there in the world today. That affects about 3.5 million people in the UK, about 350 million people worldwide. So that's a really huge proportion of the world's population. And although in individual rare diseases, a small population, you are not alone with that kind of condition. Unfortunately, despite the size of the issue, there are only about 400 licensed treatments for rare diseases. So this is really leaving millions of patients out there without treatments, and in many cases without hope of treatment, which is something which looks to be changing for Wolfram syndrome. At Findacure, we obviously think this is a huge problem, but what we do recognise is that we've got a really powerful thing in the rare disease patient population itself. Patients are really informed, because they have to be, and that gives them a massive power and determination to make changes for themselves. So as a charity, one of the things we really try and work on is that patient empowerment. So we're trying to help patients get more experience, get more expertise, so they can be advocates for themselves. We try and help patient groups form. We try and help train those patient groups with workshops, with a mentoring program, with webinars, that kind of thing, so they're better interacting with clinicians, with the pharmaceutical industry, with researchers, or just in building a more effective charity and putting on fantastic events like this. As well as that, and the thing I actually work on most, we try and promote collaborations between all the different groups in the rare disease world, so bring patient groups together with researchers, with the pharmaceutical industry. And the aim there is really to help develop new treatments. What we want to work on at Findacure is the thing we've been talking about today, and that's drug repurposing. So essentially, as I hope you're getting the impression, drug repurposing is just recycling. Okay? We're essentially trying to find new ways to use existing drugs for different diseases. So that's increasing our efficiency of the medicines we have available. We take a drug, we try and find some disease it might have been useful, we run a clinical trial to test how effectively it can work, and then with any luck, we find a new use for that drug. It gets licensed to treat more than one disease, and a new patient group has a treatment that can benefit them. We think this is a really important thing for rare diseases because essentially drug repurposing allows you to find new treatments in a faster and more economic manner, and that's crucial when you're working with small patient populations. Essentially, you remove the de novo drug discovery step, the bit where you try and build a new chemical that might have a benefit for patients all the way down. And that's very time-consuming and very costly. More importantly, we know a huge amount about existing drugs. We know how safe they are, and what side effects they have in humans. And if you know that, you can more accurately select the drug, or you can actually make sure you're using a drug that's applicable to your patient population. If it's a generic drug, that's a drug that's off patent, so anyone essentially can produce it. You've also got a low cost, but you've also got evidence that it's been used in humans for a long period of time in lots of different indications, which gives you more information. So with that information, you can reduce the need for some early stage clinical trials because you know more about its safety, and that again makes the process of repurposing faster and cheaper. We also know about the pathways of action, so how a drug actually works. And if you know how it works, that means you can intelligently select a drug, just like Phoebe and Tim are doing, to target a specific rare disease. And that, again, speeds things up, makes it quicker and cheaper. Okay, that sounds great. So why are people doing it all the time? Essentially, particularly when you're working with a generic drug, it's very hard to fund these type of trials. This is because for the pharmaceutical industry, you're working with a rare disease population, so it's quite small. And also you're working with drugs where it's hard to secure a patent, it's hard to secure intellectual property on that drug. And this means it's hard for them to recover their investment in the research they're trying to do. And this means we don't really see this type of research funded, which is a horrific thing really for rare disease patient groups that could benefit from it. What we're trying to do is build a new engine, a new way to fund this type of research. This is called a social impact bond, which I will endeavour to explain now. Okay? The basic idea of the social impact bond is we want to attract private investment to fund clinical trials. Okay? So we get investors to put money into the bond itself, which you can think of as just a bank account with lots of rules attached to it, if you like. What Findacure as a charity wants to do is draw money from that account to fund clinical trials like those we've heard about this morning. We want to ideally fund around 10 clinical trials of repurposed generic drugs in rare diseases. So what we want to do is target diseases that we think cost the NHS a lot of money to treat currently. So there's potential, if we can provide a drug that's cheap into that scenario, we can save the NHS money, which is something they're definitely pro. So any successful trial we run will therefore save the NHS money and improve the health condition of patients, the two kind of big aims of the NHS right now. That should make them happy, and a happy NHS is good, because we can hopefully make an agreement with them that they'll pay a proportion of the money they save back into our social impact bond. What this does, it allows us to return the money the investors put in up front to them. Maybe, in the right scenario, we can pay them a little bit of a return on the investment. And ideally, we have money left over, number 6 on the diagram, to fund more clinical trials in the future. So if we're really successful, we can fund loads and loads of this type of research in a completely different way. So the key message here is, rather than making money from making a new drug and charging loads for it, we're making money from charging very little for it and saving the NHS money for a defined period of time. It's a completely new way of doing things. It's something we're trying to develop. And we've been working with Wolfram Syndrome UK, with Professor Barrett, to try and do some work on this. So I got in contact with Tim probably a year ago or so now, maybe a little less, at a point when he was looking to start the grant he's just found out he would. And we were wondering about how well the work Tim was doing could fit into our model. He was investigating a low-cost drug. It worked really well, so we thought, let's try and collaborate and use Wolfram syndrome as one of 3 examples to try and prove the idea I've shown you up there can actually work in principle by looking at how much these diseases cost patients now. Okay, so we're going into a bit of a strange realm of economics. So what we needed to do was make a proof of concept study. And there were kind of 3 major areas we needed to convince the NHS about. The first one of those was that we understand the patient need for a treatment. What are the patients looking for? Is that need strong? And what are the different things that really need to be done to treat the disease? So the thing we did here with patients from Wolfram syndrome, with Wolfram syndrome, was run a patient focus group at Children's Hospital. And the idea here was to sit and ask lots of different questions to understand the patient experience of having Wolfram syndrome, the cost of it, both financially and emotionally, how diagnosis was handled, how treatment was handled, and how things can be improved, and what are patient expectations of a new treatment. I found it fantastic to get a chance to sit down and talk to patients. I'm really grateful to those who helped out. I've actually finally written up what I did now. There's a report that's available on our website, which is available for all of you to have a look at, which tries to summarise the findings. Hopefully this is something that will be useful to patients, to Wolfram Syndrome UK. It might even come in the work that Tim has to do in the next few months for finding out about the drug. So it was a real pleasure to do that, and I hope it's something that's useful. The next 2 things we had to do were understand what Wolfram syndrome actually costs the NHS now. This isn't really something anyone knows. And we had to understand how the drug that Tim's looking at repurposing for the clinical trial might actually help patients. And from that, we had to try and understand how much money that might save the NHS if it helps them as much as we think. Okay, so that gives us an idea of how much we can save, and therefore how effectively this could fit into that weird social impact bond model I showed you. So to do that, we had to do health economics, which is an exciting field. Basically, we made a massive, very complicated spreadsheet that tries to work out what every different treatment or test you guys might have at the Wolfram Clinic cost the NHS, and try and piece a formula together to say what the overall population costs in a year. So that's what we've done. And it's been really interesting. We've got some numbers now, which again could be helpful in moving things forward. So what does Wolfram syndrome cost the NHS? According to our calculations, it costs about £990,000 per year to treat the Wolfram population in the UK. And that's a pretty significant cost given the size of the population. Okay? The difficult part was understanding what this treatment, this drug, sodium valproate, could save the NHS. So what we tried to do was look at the work Tim's doing, how the clinical trial is designed to say if it just reaches that approval level, what effect could this have on the patients, and how would this affect the budget? And we built a model to predict that. And essentially we found savings of around £120,000 per year. So if you ran a social impact bond for about a 5-year period, which seems to be the standard way of doing it, and that's the period over which NHS will give us some savings, we worked out we could get savings over £672,000 in that time. That's a significant amount of money. It's not as much money as Tim has ultimately got to fund the clinical trial, but it could go a long way to doing a lot of good research or a small clinical trial to help improve the effect of that drug. So we think this type of work, which we've done in other rare diseases, proves that this model can function. And hopefully the economics itself will help in developing the treatments and projects going forward. So what is the next step? Well, we're actually talking to the NHS now, using the work we've done on Wolfram syndrome and other diseases, about using this model across the rare disease world. And we're hoping then to come back to us soon with some ideas of how we can take things forward and begin to look at building a social impact bond model for rare disease treatment purposes. We're going to work with Tim a bit more to understand what they need going forward, and if there's anything we can do to help that, whether that's more health economics, whether we might be able to find some funding to work with Wolfram syndrome in this social impact bond model. And I'm going to be going out and talking to loads of important people, or people who think they're important, who've got money, and trying to convince them that they give their money and use it to help us do more research into this model, or actually fund this model to help rare diseases in general. There's also a possibility that we'll look at building on this pilot study approach and try and find a single one of the diseases we've worked on to take forward into a trial. We'll try and provide some funding to that and work with the NHS to see what the actual impact on their budget is, rather than our predicted impact, and see if those two things match up, which is a crucial thing for the project. So if we do succeed, it will be a completely new way to develop treatments for rare diseases. Hopefully it will be a quicker way, a cheaper way, and a way that will engage and involve patients all the way through. So do watch this space for any progress. We'll try and keep everyone updated. You can find out more on our website if you'd like to. Definitely be in touch with Tracy and Rachel to let me know what's going on. That's the broad talk and everything I should be talking about, so thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to show one further cheeky slide, which is this. At Findacure, we run conferences about rare diseases, and we're really keen to have patients actually talk and share their experiences to a whole range of people in the audience. We're running an open call for any patient who might feel comfortable in sharing their story, either about drug repurposing or just having a rare disease with that audience. So if it's something that is of interest to anyone here, please do look at the website, possibly send in an application,